Welcome back, campers, to part 2 of the Fae series of November. This will be the end of my Sacred Creature series. So come December, I will return to a more camping and camper-focused podcast, but still with the campfire ghostly stories. Before we dive into that other world, I also want to discuss foot health. I had to learn the hard way that your feet are so important. I developed plantar fasciitis in both feet, as well as a bone spur in my right foot. So for a while, I wasn't getting out at all because it hurt so bad to walk, let alone hike. I went to a podiatrist and learned about some easy-to-do exercises that I could actually do at home. One of them, which really helped in the beginning, was to roll a tennis ball back and forth along the arch of my foot. This helped so much, and so did standing on the edge of a step to where your heel sort of hangs off the edge, and holding on to the wall or a rail. I would lift up and down on the upper part of my foot to give that bottom part of my foot a good stretch. This was a little bit tricky because, well, I'm a little bit prone to clumsiness, but it did really help. So for those of you who are suffering from some foot pains, of course, go see a doctor and try out those exercises. I even found a really great exercise on YouTube, and I would be happy to post a link to my notes where you can see and check it out for yourself. Now, with that little health portion out of the way, here is a little story of mine when it comes to the house fairies or house gnomes, if you will, however you refer to them. I had woken up one morning and decided for breakfast I wanted to boil some eggs. After they had been boiled, cooled, I peeled the shells off, cut them in half, and placed them on a plate. Now, it was one of those days where I was just forgetting everything. So, one of those days where you put your shoes on and you realize you need socks, or you put the left shoe on the right foot and the right shoe on the left. It's just one of those days. So I had set my eggs down on my plate, like I said, and I decided I kind of wanted to devil them up a little bit. So I turned around, went to the refrigerator to get some mayo. I turned around, grabbed the mayo, and I went back to where my plate of eggs were. Now, when I returned, one of the halves, I had 4, I had boiled 2 eggs. So one of those halves had scooted to the other side of the plate, just one. I just, chalked it up to the moisture from the egg. Maybe there was still some water on that egg, and that's why it slid down. No biggie. I actually pushed it back over to the other ones, because that's the way I am, and I set my mayo down, but then I realized I needed pepper. I need pepper for my hard-boiled eggs. So again, I turn around, go to the cabinet, get the pepper. When I come back, guess what? That same egg scooted back over to the other side of the plate. Okay, it was weird. It was a little weird. It kind of made me smile, and I just brushed it off. So I had my mayo, I had my eggs, had my pepper, and then I like a little kick for my hard-boiled eggs, and I thought, you know what? These are gonna need some Tabasco. So I turned around again. I go back to the cabinet, grab my Tabasco, and when I return, not only did that same egg half move to the edge of the plate, but the yolk had turned upside down. I'm not kidding. Not the whole egg, mind you, just the yolk. So the yellow part had flipped upside down inside the white part. It was at that moment I knew somebody was messing with me. I was alone in my house. I had my dog, which if my dog could have gotten to those eggs, they'd have disappeared. Number 1. Number 2, I do have cats. And again, if they were eggs and they knew about it, they would have taken those eggs away also. So I knew a house spirit or elf or gnome, again, whichever word you prefer to use, had decided to play a little trick on me, which I thought it was funny. I laughed and I said, "Thanks for the laugh." I finished dressing up my eggs, devil style, and I didn't have any problems the rest of the day. But, however, it did keep a smile on my face, and I kind of needed that. So that's just a little sample of what I believe are some sort of house fae that likes to be a little tricky now and then. And they aren't just always tricky. I have asked for their help a number of times in my home, and I'll be honest, maybe it was a day or two later, I did get my answer. I really can't help but feel a tugging at my soul when I read other stories regarding these good folk. If you took a listen to the first part of my Fae Folk episode, I shared some of the lore of the Anglo-Saxons and Scottish. The Fae of Ireland were also human-like, generally speaking. Some say they were slightly shorter than humans, but that's really neither here nor there. The Irish refer to the folk as a she. In Gaelic, this translates to the people of the mound. There is some superstition alluding to the fact that just saying their name in any form could bring about a bit of mischief to your hearth. To stay on their good side, they are generally referred to as the good folk, the wee folk, or the gentle people, and even the others. The Irish believe Fae are the original inhabitants of Ireland. They had strength, physical strength, even stronger than a man. They were, in fact, smart too, and of course they had to be, seeing as how tricky they were. Their magical powers were considered to be some of the strongest. As man migrated to the island of Ireland, the Fae retreated to the underground, to that other realm, but they still watched over the animals and land. As it has been with other cultures, Christianity tried to morph the spiritual beliefs to fit their narrative and tried to explain that the Fae, Gnomes, or the other folk, if you prefer, were in fact fallen angels who repented just in the nick of time. And instead of going to hell, they just went underground. But that doesn't really mix well, as the Fae can be dangerous to those humans who cross their path in a negative way. So it really doesn't sound like an angel that had repented, if you ask me. If that was the case, then those angels would be doing everything possible, to get back into God's good graces. As with the lore of other lands, Ireland's lore has its similarities regarding the elves, or fairy, or pixie. However, these ones did not have wings, like Disney may have tried to tell you. They were not cute, pert, tiny, skinny little creatures, so just kind of, again, ignore the cutie pie image. However, some of them were some of the most beautiful. Now, again, not cutie pie, but beautiful, magical, and again, a little bit naughty. They could look just like you or me, and their true identity could only be discerned if you could detect a wild glimmer in their eye. Now, you may be asking yourself, what about the leprechaun? If anyone ever mentioned anything about Ireland, then the leprechaun would sure to have come up. Well, yes, the leprechauns are another spirit of Ireland. This legend of the leprechaun goes all the way back to the 8th century, where a poem was written called The Saga of Fergus MacLeod. Now, Fergus was a king who ruled the southern half of Ulster. Ulster was an area of Ireland, but at that time, the island was not called Ireland. It was broken up into many sort of differently ruled areas. Now, there was a group who kind of oversaw all of Ireland. They were called the Uliad. They were actually a ruling dynasty, a Gaelic group who kind of overruled the kingdom, and they decided they wanted one king to be the true ruler of this province, Ulster. And they had actually chosen Fergus. However, the northern king, Kingle Clarneck, vehemently refused and went to war. Now, a little history here. Both kings decided to marry women that could bolster their armies and strengthen their regime. As history tells us, it is Congal who actually overtook the throne and became king. King Fergus actually had his titles stripped from him, and King Congal gave those titles to his brother, Ross. However, Ross ended up being killed, and King Fergus ended up inheriting his titles back. However, during the battle, Fergus MacLeod encountered what he called Leprechaun, or little bodies. These little folk tried to drag Fergus into the sea while he was sleeping after escaping from King Congal's attack. These leprechauns began pulling Fergus down, and it was only when the coldness of the water touched Fergus's body that he woke. Struggling, he grabbed the leprechauns and held tight to them. Now, in order to be released, these leprechauns offered King Fergus a wish with 3 parts: that he would be able to breathe under rivers, seas, and lakes. He is told by the leprechauns that this wish is granted except for the Loch Rodreg, or what is now called Dundrum Bay. Ignoring this warning, Fergus attempts to cross the bay, and he is met by a huge sea monster called Muirdris. The monster is so terrifying that Fergus's face freezes in a terrifying expression. This deformity is kept from Fergus for a number of years, until one day he was beating a servant. Now the servant, angered at this, turns and tells him of why he looks the way he does. Filled with rage, Fergus returns to the sea and battles this monster. He enters a 2-day battle where both he and the monster die, while the sea around them turns red with their shared blood. As of today, that is the oldest story found referencing the leprechaun. They are always described as being about 2 foot tall. However, most people assume that the leprechaun is sort of gnarly looking, red bushy beard and dressed in green. However, that is not correct. The actual description of the leprechaun was actually that he was a shoe cobbler, a cobbler. And that is a shoemaker or one who repairs shoes. So he had a day job. And honestly, the whole stealing coins and hoarding coins in his pot really didn't make sense, because the leprechaun couldn't do anything with the gold. It's not like he could walk into any old real estate office and purchase the nicest castle this side of the Loch Ness, could he? Of course not. The leprechaun also did not wear green. He actually was very well kept, and his jacket was that of red with gold lace, and his hat was the same color. It is believed that the leprechaun's love of gold was more about their mischievous nature. After all, they are elven and enjoy tricking us humans. It's interesting to note that there are no female leprechauns. All records, all the way back to the 1830s, only describe male leprechauns, and it is believed that they are actually deformed offspring of fairies. Now, gnomes. Does anyone really know what a gnome is? Well, the Europeans describe the gnome as dwarves who dwell in the underground. They guard mines and hide treasures. They have gnarly faces. They're small and, in all accounts, disformed. There was a king of the gnome called Gob. he had a magical sword and could influence melancholy in men. But their lore changed depending on who you asked. And even their written history, it gets a little muddled with current fairy tales. Snow White's 7 dwarfs were also considered gnomes in all actuality. They mined for their treasure in the earth. They were very short and they kept to themselves. For a more, I'll say, rougher around the edge version, the Brothers Grimm books included a more dangerous approach. Take, for example, the original story of Rumpelstiltskin. Good old Rump was sometimes referred to as an imp, but was most notably referred to as a gnome. Now, Rumpelstiltskin, if you don't know the story, came upon a poor girl who was held captive by a king. This king believed that she could spin straw into gold. Rumpelstiltskin appears just in the nick of time, as the girl only had a night to spin the gold. Rumpelstiltskin, in his fashion, offers to spin the gold for her in return for her necklace of glass beads. The girl agrees, Rump gets to work, and all the straw is spun into gold. Well, the king sees this and brings the girl to yet another room, filled with even more straw, and demands the girl spin it to gold. If she doesn't, he will kill her. Now, why did this king even get the notion that she could spin straw to gold? Well, that would fall on the father of said girl. He had loudly boasted that his daughter was the finest spinner in all the land and could even spin straw into gold. This story obviously reached the king's ears, and he expected it to be true. And that, my camper, is how this poor girl has wound up in this situation. On the second night, our friend Rump appears again and agrees to spin the straw for her into gold, this time for her ring. Well, the king is just as happy as a pig in shittles, and he takes her to a yet larger room filled with even more straw. And he tells her if she can spin all the straw to gold, he will marry her. Not set her free or pay for all the work she has done, compensate her for being kidnapped. No. Those things would just be silly. Oh, but if she doesn't do it this third time, he'll kill her. Yeah, men. Odd creatures in their own right. As the girl sits in the midst of all this straw, she begins to cry again, when who should appear but good old Rumpelstiltskin. Sadly, this time the girl has nothing to offer him. She has no jewelry, no money, just the clothes on her back. Rump thinks on this and suggests, hey, I have an idea. How about you give me your firstborn? That seems fair, right? Well, albeit reluctantly, the girl agrees. Otherwise, she's doomed to die. The straw is spun, and the king marries the girl he had kidnapped and threatened with murder. Good times. Well, wouldn't you know it, camper? The now queen has a beautiful baby, and Rump shows up to claim what was promised him. The queen offers Rumpelstiltskin all the gold she has, and he tells her he has no desire for riches, because what can he really do with them? But if she can guess his name, of which she has 3 days to do so, he will give up his claim to the child. Well, camper, the queen goes through every name she can think of, and it is to no avail. On that third night, the queen walks into the woods, looking for our friend Rumpelstiltskin. It's dark, and the queen is quiet. As she goes deeper into the woods, she catches the light of a fire. As she creeps closer, she sees him. It's Rumpelstiltskin, and he's dancing round the fire next to a mountain cottage. As he dances, he sings a song that goes a little like this. Tonight, tonight, my plans I make. Tomorrow, tomorrow, the baby I take. The queen will never win the game, for Rumpelstiltskin is my name. The queen now knows his name, but she has to play her card just right. It's the only one she has. As silent as she came, even more silent, she left that mountain cottage and returned home to wait for Rump's final return. On that next day, Rump, all full of himself and full of glee, appears in front of the queen, ready to claim his prize. That smile drops from his face as the queen says his name loudly, Rumpelstiltskin. It is here we have a few differences. Depending on the publication of your story camper, you have maybe read that Rumpelstiltskin, all hot and bothered, ran back to the woods, never to be seen again. But other, older stories have a more dire ending. In the 1857 edition, the ending of Rumpelstiltskin is a bit more gory. In all his anger, Rumpelstiltskin drives his right foot so hard into the ground that it sinks, and the earth rises up around him up to his waist. With even more rage and fury, Rumpelstiltskin grabs his left foot and with a vicious yank tears himself in two. Another version is just a little bit different. Again, Rumpelstiltskin has his right foot sunk deeply into the earth. But instead of tearing himself in two, he creates a chasm, falling into it himself, never to be heard from again. Interestingly, the story of Rumpelstiltskin actually has a different name. Well, it started off with a different name, a different gnome, or imp, if you will, and the girl who was caught up in all of this, her story is a little bit different too. There was the spinning of yarn, but instead of spinning it to gold, it was spun to flax. And instead of the creature requesting the firstborn babe, he requested the hand of the girl held captive by the king. And the name, well, even that name is very different. For as the story goes, it was the king who happened upon what he called an imp in the forest. This imp was spinning flax in the middle of the forest and singing a song, Nimmy, nimmy, not, my name's Tom Tit Tot. On that next eve, the imp appeared with its latest skein of flax, ready to take the girl away with him. The girl asks, Is your name Solomon? No, he replied, and climbed through the window into her room. Is your name Zebedee? No, again, he said, and a long tail slithers out from under his coat as he crept close enough to her that his breath felt hot on her neck. She then stood firm and strongly sung, Nimmy, nimmy, not, your name's Tom Tit Tot. With an evil shriek, the imp disappeared through the window, never to be seen again. Honestly, I would have been curious to see if Tom Tit Tot had anything better to offer than what this king had. I mean, this king also took this girl away from her family, held her captive, threatened her with death if she did not spin this skeins of yarn for him. Good old Tom Tit Tot, or even Rumpelstiltskin, he might have had something better to offer her. You never know. Now, as the world turns, the gnomes and their earthly lore soon took on other elements of the land to include air, fire, and water. Some gnomes were even divided up in between garden gnomes, forest gnomes, and woodland gnomes. But let's be honest, we have seen and read the gnomes of gardens and forests So why not include a little air, fire, and water? Or let me guess, you know all there is to know of the gnome and the fairy world. The many stories of gnomes include those who dwell in the forest, those who speak with animals, and some prefer to keep to themselves. Some actually harbor no ill will and seem to just want to live their lives in a more nomadic sense. Now, gnomes of the garden. Stories say that these gnomes seem to enjoy a little more naughtiness. As for the house gnomes, or brownies if you will, these can be both a little naughty, but some can also be quite helpful, even cleaning up your house while you sleep. Whatever you call them, whether they be friendly, mischievous, or wanting to keep to themselves, I would advise that you always pay your respects. As far as you know, they may be watching you now. Well, camper, that was a fun series of stories, if I do say so myself. I hope you enjoyed this campfire tale of fairy elves and gnomes. Come December, my stories will include all those fun hiking spots, as well as the lore. If you want to submit your own story of the Fae, feel free to submit your story to campfireghoststories8@gmail.com. That's campfireghoststories, the number 8@gmail.com. You can keep up to date on all the campfire happenings on my Instagram page, Campfire Ghost Stories. And if you haven't yet joined, I have a Patreon page, Campfire Ghost Stories. There you can take a look at some tasty camping meals, and you have the option of joining my first tier, where for just $5 a month, you would be part of my drink and divination tier. Here I share a drink, usually a tea, and a little divination for those more discerning folk. And as always, you are always welcome in the green, no matter where you hail from. So come, take a seat by the fire, and let me tell you a ghostly tale. Until we meet again, camper.